Do you even know who my father is? Logan Whitmore leaned out of his truck window, sunglasses on, smirk wide, looking at the woman in oil-stained jeans like she was something he'd scraped off his boot. Emily Carter didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eye and said quietly, so quietly it almost sounded gentle, "I don't care who your father is. You owe me $340. Cash or card?" He laughed. He actually laughed. And that laugh, that single, careless, arrogant laugh, was the worst mistake Logan Whitmore would ever make in his entire life. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because the story you're about to hear is one that will stay with you long after it's over. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's go back to where it all began. The night Logan Whitmore's truck broke down was a Thursday. Cold, dark. The kind of Montana night where the wind comes off the mountains with teeth in it, where the highway stretches so far in both directions that a person can start to feel like the last human being alive on the planet. There's everywhere. No houses. No lights except the weak glow of hazard flashers blinking orange against the asphalt. Logan sat in his truck, phone pressed to his ear, already irritated. He had been driving back from a dinner in Billings, a dinner where 3 people had called him Mr. before he even sat down, where the restaurant owner had personally come to his table to make sure everything was perfect. He was a Whitmore. That name still meant something in this part of Montana, even if his father hadn't stepped in a boxing ring in 20 years. The truck had simply stopped. No warning light, no coughing engine, no gradual loss of power. It just died. The way old machines sometimes do, suddenly and completely, as if it had simply decided it was done. He called the first towing service he found online, a place called Carter Towing. The woman who answered spoke in a calm, even voice and told him someone would be there in about 40 minutes. 40 minutes? Logan repeated. Do you know how cold it is out here? Yes, sir, the woman said. Montana in October tends to be that way. Someone's on the way. She hung up before he could respond. Logan stared at the phone for a moment, mildly surprised. People didn't usually hang up on him, or rather they never did. 41 minutes later, headlights appeared in the distance. A tow truck, well used but clean, pulled up behind his vehicle. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman. She was maybe late 30s, Papa's early 40s, with dark hair pulled back and a face that didn't waste expressions on things that didn't deserve them. She wore heavy work gloves and a canvas jacket with Carter Towing stitched across the chest. Her movements were efficient. No wasted motion. She walked to his truck the way a person walks when they've done something 10,000 times and don't need to think about it anymore. You called Carter Towing? She said. Obviously, Logan replied, stepping out of his truck. He looked her up and down the way people do when they're surprised by something they didn't expect and aren't entirely sure they approve of. I'm the driver, she said. Emily Carter. Happened. It just stopped, Logan said. No warning. I was doing about 60, and it just died. Emily nodded, already moving toward the front of his truck, pulling a small flashlight from her jacket pocket. She didn't ask him to step aside. She didn't explain what she was doing. She just started working. Logan watched her for a moment, then looked at his phone. No signal. He looked at the truck. He looked back at Emily, who was leaning under the hood with complete concentration, flashlight in her teeth. How long is this going to take? He asked. She didn't answer right away. She looked at something, touched something, then straightened up. Fuel pump, she said. Probably. I can't know for certain until it's in the shop. We'll need to tow it. Tonight? If you want it, looked at tonight, yes. Exhaled. Fine. How much? Tow to the shop is $140. Diagnostic fee is $40. If it's the fuel pump and we have the part, labor and parts runs around $160. So roughly $340 to start, depending on what else we find. Logan looked at her. $340 was not a significant amount of money for Logan Whitmore. He spent more than that on dinner 3 nights a week. Something about the way she said it flatly, factually, without apology or negotiation, made him pause. She hadn't offered him a deal. She hadn't softened the number or suggested they could work something out. She had simply told him what it cost. You know, Logan said, my father is Gerald Whitmore. Emily looked at him. Okay, Gerald Whitmore, he repeated. Boxer. He had a gym on the county road for years. Athletic. Your shop probably had people call from over there. I know who Gerald Whitmore is, Emily said. She was already moving toward the back of the tow truck, pulling out the equipment she needed to load his vehicle. $840, cash or card, once we confirmed the diagnosis. Logan felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not quite anger. More like the sensation of standing in a room where the door you expected isn't where you thought it would be. I'm just saying, he said, following her. A business like yours, there's probably value in having a connection to someone like my family. Emily looked at him over her shoulder. She said, simply, your name may open doors in this town. It doesn't change my prices. Then she went back to work. Logan stood there, and the wind came off the mountains the way it does in October, and for a moment he had absolutely no idea what to say. Not used to that feeling. He didn't like it. The shop was on the edge of Crestfall, the kind of small Montana town that had a diner, a hardware store, a church, a feed supply company, and not much else worth mentioning. Towing occupied a building that had probably been something else before, a warehouse maybe, or an old machine shop, with wide garage doors and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly when they first came on. Emily brought the truck in at 11:15 at night. The employee was still there, a young man named Ryan Mitchell, 23 years old, who had been with Carter towing for about 18 months and who had never once seen Emily Carter raise her voice in anything that wasn't a situation requiring volume for safety reasons. Ryan had curly red hair and the earnest, slightly anxious expression of someone who genuinely wanted to do a good job and worried constantly that he wasn't doing it well enough. Whit truck? Ryan said, looking at the vehicle on the flatbed. Fuel pump, probably, Emily said. Check the parts inventory. If we have it, we start first thing tomorrow. What about the customer? Emily glanced toward the waiting area where Logan was sitting with his phone in his hand. He'll need a ride somewhere. Call him a cab or ask if he needs a number. I nodded and went inside. Logan appeared in the garage doorway. Is there a hotel nearby? The Pineview Motel is about a mile down the main road, Emily said, still making notes on her clipboard. I can call you a cab. I can just wait here. Emily looked up. The shop closes tonight. You're welcome to come back tomorrow morning at 8. Logan looked at the shop around him, at the organized rows of tools and the clean concrete floor and the framed work certifications on the wall. He looked at Emily. He was trying to read her the way he usually read people, easily and immediately, and he was finding nothing particularly readable. She wasn't cold. She wasn't rude. She was simply done with the conversation. 8 o'clock, he said. 8 o'clock, she confirmed. He left. Ryan came and stood beside Emily after the cab had been called, watching the taillights disappear down the road. He seemed annoyed, Ryan said. He did, Emily agreed. You know who his dad is, right? I do. You're not worried? Emily set down her clipboard and looked at Ryan with the particular patience of someone who has explained something before and is willing to explain it again. Ryan, she said, in this business, the moment you start doing favors based on who someone's father is, you've stopped having a business and having a performance. And I don't do performances. Ryan thought about that for a moment. That's a good line, he said. Not a line, Emily said. Go home. Get some sleep. 8 o'clock tomorrow. Logan came back at 7:45 the next morning. Not alone, should have told Emily. Something. A man who doesn't respect other people's time comes early to show he controls his own. Fresh from the motel. And he had the look of someone who had slept badly and was carrying that sleeplessness in his jaw. Ryan met him at the front desk. Mr. Whitmore, Ryan said. Carter will be with you in a few minutes. Can I get you some coffee? Where is she? In the back. She started early this morning, actually got a head start on your truck. Logan said nothing, went to the waiting area, sat down. Emily came in from the garage at exactly 8 o'clock. She was already in her work clothes, hands clean, holding the clipboard. She walked to the desk, set it down, and looked at Logan. "Armed," she said. "We had the part. We also found a secondary issue with your fuel filter. It was completely blocked, which is probably what killed the pump prematurely. We replaced both. Labor parts. Everything. Your total is $378. Logan looked at the invoice she placed in front of him. He picked it up. He studied, set it back down. "This is more than you quoted me last night," he said. "The filter was additional," Emily said. "I itemized everything. You can see the part cost and the labor for each line. I don't see why you couldn't have called to authorize the extra work before you did it." "It was a $20 filter and 15 minutes of labor," Emily said. "If I'd left it in, you'd have burned through the new fuel pump within 6 months. I can take it back out if you'd like." There was a pause. Logan looked at her. "Is that a joke?" "No, sir. It'll take me about 15 minutes. You can have the blocked filter back and I'll knock it off the bill." Ryan, who was pretending to organize papers at the far end of the desk, coughed softly into his fist. Logan's jaw tightened. "I'll pay the full amount." "Thank you," Emily said. He paid it, but he didn't leave. He stood there, card back in his wallet, and said, "You don't make this easy." "Works," Emily said. "That's what I promised you. I'm talking about the experience. The customer experience." "I see," Emily said, with the tone of someone who sees very clearly. "What would you have preferred?" "I would have preferred," Logan said slowly, "to be treated like someone whose business matters to this shop." "Every customer's business matters to this shop," Emily said. "That's why I itemize. That's why I call when something serious comes up. That's why I give you the exact same price I give everyone else." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Emily looked at him steadily. "Say what you mean, Mr. Whitmore." And something shifted in the air. Because Logan had spent his entire life dealing with people who softened what they said, who left room for him to interpret things favorably, who gave him the gentle version because his name was worth something. Emily Carter had just told him, directly and without cruelty, to say what he actually meant. And what he meant was, "I expected special treatment. I didn't get it. And I want you to know I noticed." He couldn't say that. So instead he picked up his keys, looked at her one final time with an expression that sat somewhere between respect and resentment, and walked out. Emily watched him go. Ryan came to stand beside her. "He's going to be a problem," Ryan said. "Maybe," Emily said. "You're not worried?" Emily picked up her clipboard. "Get the Henderson truck prepped. They need it by noon." 3 days passed. Then the first contract cancellation came. It was the Sutter Ranch they'd used Carter Towing for 11 years. Ever since Emily's father had pulled one of their equipment trucks out of a ditch during a January ice storm and refused to charge overtime, even though it had taken 4 hours. They called Ryan because they didn't want to call Emily directly. Ryan listened, thanked them professionally, hung up, and came to find Emily in the garage. "Sutter Ranch canceled," he said. Emily looked up from what she was doing. "Reason?" "Going in a different direction," Ryan said. That's all they said. Emily set down her tool, called them back, asked if there was a service issue. Ryan called back. They said no service issue. They just felt it was time for a change. They wished Carter Towing well. Emily went back to work. The next day, Meridian Freight canceled. They had been a Carter Towing account for 7 years. Trucks, regular call volume, good relationship. They didn't give a specific reason either. They were very polite. They wished her well. The day after that, 3 smaller accounts called within a 2-hour window. All cancellations, all polite, all vague. Emily sat at her desk that night and looked at the numbers. She was not a person who panicked. She had learned a long time ago, in situation considerably more serious than a string of canceled business contracts, that panic was a choice, and it was almost always the wrong one. She pulled out a legal pad and wrote down every cancellation, the date, the time, the specific language used. She called several of the accounts back herself, under the pretense of wanting to gather feedback. She was friendly. She was professional. She was listening for what people weren't saying. And slowly, like tuning a radio to a signal you can barely hear, she began to pick it up. The hesitations, the careful word choices, the way some of them said we just got a better offer without being able to describe the offer when she gently asked follow-up questions. The way one man from a freight company said, Emily, I'm sorry, I really am, but you understand there are pressures sometimes, and then stopped himself and said nothing more. She understood. This wasn't business. This was a message. Logan Whitmore had made some phone calls. Emily sat with that knowledge for a long time. She didn't feel fear exactly. What she felt was something quieter and more cold, the recognition that someone had decided she was small enough to eliminate by simply making a few calls. That she was the kind of person you could erase from the economic landscape of a small town by leaning on people with influence, because she was just a tow truck driver, just a woman in oil-stained jeans who showed up when people's cars died. She thought about who she had been. She thought about what she had left behind. She thought about the vest in the locked room, and she made herself a promise, not yet, not yet. Ryan came to her on the 6th day. He didn't come during work hours. He came at 7 in the evening when the shop was closed, and he knocked on the side door the way someone knocks when they have something to say that they're not entirely sure they should say. Emily opened the door. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know before he said a word. And she said, he sat down at the small table in the back office, the room where she kept her files and her coffee maker, and the locked storage room door that nobody had ever asked about, for a moment. Someone followed me, Ryan said. Emily waited. After the Hendricks call last Tuesday, the truck back, and there was a black SUV behind me. I didn't think anything of it at first. Then I stopped for gas and it stopped. I got back on the road and it was still there. He paused. It followed me to my apartment. Did anyone approach you? The next morning, Ryan said, there was a man in the parking lot of my building. I'd never seen him before. He was just standing there. And when I walked past him to get to my truck, he said, you might want to think about where you're working, son. Some places aren't worth the trouble. The room was very quiet. And then he left, Emily asked. And then he left, Ryan said. Emily looked at the young man across the table from her. She thought about his 18 months of honest work, his anxious helpfulness, his genuine desire to do a good job. She thought about the fact that he lived alone in a small apartment and was probably sending some of his paycheck home to his mother in Wyoming, the way he had mentioned once and never mentioned again. She felt something move in her chest. It was not fear. It was something much older, much heavier, and much more capable of action. Ryan, she said, I need you to listen to me carefully. He nodded. This is not your fight. I want you to know that first. Whatever is happening here, it's directed at me, not at you. You've done nothing wrong. I know that, he said. But second, she said, I need you to document everything you just told me. Write it down tonight, exact words, exact location, description of the man, make and model of the SUV if you remember it. Anything. Will you do that? And third, she paused. She looked at the locked storage room door. She looked back at Ryan. What happens next? And I want to be very clear that I don't expect anything to happen to you directly. I will make absolutely certain of that. But whatever happens next, I need you to trust me. And looked at her for a long moment. He had worked for Emily Carter for a year and a half. He had watched her handle furious customers with patience. He had watched her stay at the shop until 2 in the morning to finish a job she'd promised by morning. He had watched her once deal with a man twice her size who had gotten in her face about a bill, and she had been so absolutely calm that the man had simply deflated and apologized. He had always sensed, without being able to articulate it, that there was something behind Emily Carter that he had never seen. Trust you, he said. Emily nodded. After he left, she sat alone in the back office for a very long time. Then she got up, walked to the locked storage room, and stood in front of the door. She had a key on a ring she kept in her desk drawer, in the back, behind everything else. She got it now. She held it in her hand. She didn't open the door. Not tonight, not yet. She held the key, and she thought about the phone call she had been avoiding for almost 8 years. And she thought about what it would mean to make it, and what it would cost and what it might protect. She put the key in her pocket and she left it there because when the moment came and she knew now that the moment was coming, she would be ready. She was always ready. That was the thing Logan Whitmore had never understood, would not understand until it was far too late that the woman he had dismissed as small was not small at all. She had simply chosen for years to take up less space than she was capable of filling. And she was about done with that choice. The key stayed in Emily's pocket for 2 more days. She carried it everywhere. She could feel the weight of it, not the physical weight, which was almost nothing, just a small brass key on a plain steel ring, but the other weight, the one that had nothing to do with metal and everything to do with what the key represented, what it would mean to use it, what she would be admitting to herself the moment she turned it in that lock. She wasn't ready to admit it yet, so she worked. She took every call that came in. She ran the shop. She kept her face exactly the same, as it had always been, steady, focused, unreadable, in the particular way that people who've trained themselves against reaction tend to be. She didn't talk about the cancellations. She didn't talk about Ryan's parking lot conversation with the stranger. She didn't talk about the key, but she watched. She watched which businesses still called and which ones had gone quiet. She watched the patterns in the silences. She watched the timing, how the cancellations had come in waves, clustered together, like someone was making calls down a list in a specific order. That kind of organization didn't happen by accident. That was someone sitting somewhere with a phone and a purpose and enough local connections to make people listen. On the 8th day, her supplier called. Jim Palante had been supplying Carter Towing with parts for 9 years. He was a heavy-set man from outside Billings who laughed easily and always remembered the name of Emily's late father with genuine warmth. He had driven out personally to the shop twice when she'd needed emergency parts for a roadside job and couldn't wait for shipping. He was not the kind of man who made difficult calls without feeling them, which was exactly why his voice sounded the way it did when Emily picked up. Emily, he said, I need to talk to you about something. She sat down. She recognized that tone. Go ahead, Jim. I got a call, he said. I'm not going to tell you who from, because honestly, the whole conversation made me feel like I needed a shower afterward, and I don't want to give them any more air than they deserve. I got a call, and they suggested, and I want you to understand I'm using that word loosely, because it didn't feel much like a suggestion. They suggested that my business might benefit from reconsidering certain accounts. I was quiet for a moment. Jim, Emily said. I told them to go to hell, Jim said immediately. I want you to know that. I told them in exactly those words. One of the most honest accounts I have ever dealt with in 23 years of doing this, and I wouldn't drop you for some silver tongued. And then he stopped himself. Took a breath. I called because I thought you should know. Whatever's happening, Emily, somebody's working a list. I'm probably not the only call they made. You're not, she said. How bad is it? She looked at her ledger. 11 accounts. 11 in 8 days. Bad enough, she said. Jim was quiet for a moment. You want me to put out some feelers? I know people who know people. Oh, Emily said. Thank you. But no, I need to handle this my way. Your way, he repeated. And there was something in his voice, a curiosity of something almost like recognition, as if Jim Palante had always suspected that Emily Carter had more behind her than a tow truck and a parts account and a framed business license on the wall. Right? You call me if that changes. I will, she said. She hung up the phone and sat alone with the numbers. 11 accounts, 11 silent phones, 11 relationships, some of them a decade old, built by her father before she even came back to Crestfall, quietly poisoned by someone who thought the most effective way to destroy a person was to make them invisible, to simply remove them from the landscape, one connection at a time, until they were standing alone in an empty shop, with no work and no explanation, and no one willing to say out loud what had happened. It was a sophisticated cruelty, and Emily recognized it because she had seen it before. Not here, not in this life, in another life. In the kind of world where the people who wanted to hurt you rarely came at you directly, because coming at you directly meant acknowledging you were worth the confrontation. The key was in her pocket. She took it out and set it on the desk. She looked at it. Then she picked up her other phone, not the shop line, a personal cell she kept in her desk drawer, the number known by perhaps 15 people on the planet, and she pulled up a contact she hadn't touched in 3 years. The contact was listed under a single letter D. She stared at it. She put the phone face down on the desk and stood up and walked to the garage because she wasn't ready. Not yet. There was still something she needed to try first. Something that didn't require the key or the phone or the life she had folded up and locked away. She needed to look Logan Whitmore in the eye. She found him the next morning. She hadn't called ahead. She hadn't asked anyone where he'd be. In a town the size of Crestfall, if you wanted to find someone who came from a family like the Whitmores, you went to one of 3 places. The diner on Main, on 4th, the old athletic complex on the county road that Gerald Whitmore had built in his prime, and that his son now used as a combination gym and personal monument to the family legacy. Emily chose the athletic complex. She walked in at 9:15 in the morning, while Logan was in the middle of what appeared to be a conversation with 2 other men, both of them the broad-shouldered, carefully casual type that wealthy men collect around themselves the way some people collect furniture. Logan saw her before she was halfway across the floor. Something moved in his expression. Not quite surprise. Not quite guilt. Something in between, gone almost immediately, replaced by the practiced ease of a man who controlled every room he entered. "Carter," he said. The 2 men looked at her. She looked at them. They didn't introduce themselves, and she didn't ask. She said, "I need 5 minutes." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the 2 men and said, easily, "Give us a minute." They moved away without comment, and Emily had time to register that they did so with the particular obedience of people who are being paid to be available and agreeable. Friends, employees, tools in human shape. "You want some coffee?" Logan asked, walking toward a small table near the wall. "No," Emily said. He sat down. She remained standing. He noticed that and didn't comment on it, which told her he was smarter than he sometimes appeared. 11 accounts, she said, in 8 days. All of them customers I've had for years. All of them calling with no real explanation. All of them very polite. All of them very vague. Logan looked at her calmly. "That's unfortunate." "Yes," Emily said. "It is. And I'd like to know if you know anything about it." "Why would I know anything about other businesses' decisions?" "Because Emily said the timing is specific. The pattern is specific. And your family has relationships with most of the companies on that list." Logan leaned back slightly in his chair. He had the look of a man who was running calculations, assessing how much she knew, how much she could prove, how much it mattered. "Miss Carter," he said, "I think you might be looking for a simple explanation for what is actually just normal business volatility. Accounts come and go, relationships shift. That's not a conspiracy, that's commerce." Emily repeated. "Commerce," he said again, more firmly. "And the man who followed my employee home and stood outside his apartment the next morning?" Her voice didn't rise. "A fraction. Is that commerce too?" Something moved behind Logan's eyes. A moment. A flicker. There and gone. It was enough. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Logan. She stepped closer to the table. She put both hands flat on the surface and leaned in slightly, not aggressively, but with a particular kind of weight. The weight of someone who is being very deliberate about how much of themselves they're choosing to show. "I'm going to give you an opportunity right now. I'm going to ask you once, plainly, to stop what you're doing. Store what you've damaged. Leave my employee alone. And we end this here." He looked up at her. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something in his face that was almost honest. Recognition, maybe. A small internal reckoning with the fact that the person standing in front of him was not performing anger or performing power, but was simply telling him something true. It passed, he smiled. It was a small smile, controlled. The kind that people practice in mirrors until it looks natural. "Appreciate you coming in," he said. "But I think your business problems are your business problems. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful." Emily looked at him for a long moment. She straightened up. "All right," she said. She walked to the door and Logan watched her go with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he had just won something. He didn't see her face as she walked out. If he had, he might have understood sooner. Ryan was at the shop when she got back. He had the Henderson truck halfway through a brake job and he looked up when she came in, reading her expression the way he'd learned to over 18 months of close quarters. How did it go? He asked. He's not going to stop, Emily said, and set down his wrench. So what do we do? Emily looked at him for a moment. She thought about how young he was, about his apartment in Crestfall, about his mother in Wyoming, about the fact that this job had probably been a real piece of luck for him, steady hours, honest pay, a boss who treated him like a human being, and about how Logan Whitmore was apparently willing to threaten a 23-year-old kid in a parking lot to send a message to someone he considered beneath him. You're going to keep doing the job, Emily said. Exactly the same as always. To document everything, anything unusual, anyone who follows you, any strange calls. And you're going to trust me. That's what you said before. And I meant it then too. Ryan picked up his wrench again. He was quiet for a moment. And then he said, without looking up, Emily, are you? She paused. What do you mean? Ryan said carefully, I've worked for a lot of people. And most people, someone starts messing with their business, they panic. They call a lawyer. They cry in the bathroom. They start making desperate moves. You've done none of those things. You're the same, as you always are, except your eyes are different. He glanced at her. Like you're calculating something the rest of us can't see. Raj was very quiet. I'm your boss, Emily said finally. That's who I am today. Ryan nodded slowly. Okay, he said. And he went back to the brake job. Emily went back to her office. She opened the desk drawer. She took out the small personal cell. She looked at the contact listed under D. Then she put it away again and took out her documentation instead, because there was still work to do before that call, still dots to connect, still a record to build. Because when Emily Carter did something, she did it completely, with no loose ends and no half measures, and she had not survived the things she had survived by moving before she was ready. She would be ready soon. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was from a woman named Sandra Cho, who ran the accounts for Meridian Freight, one of the accounts that had canceled 2 weeks earlier. Sandra had clearly not meant to call. The call was short, muffled, and when Emily said hello, Sandra went quiet for 3 full seconds before she said, in a rushed whisper, I can't talk. I shouldn't be calling. But, Emily, I want you to know we were asked to. We didn't want to. We were told that if we kept your account, there would be consequences for our renewal with the county warehouse contract. Then the line went dead. Emily sat very still. The county warehouse contract. That was a government contract county level, routed through a committee, the kind of procurement process that was technically public and practically opaque. The families with long-standing influence could quietly shape with the right relationships with the right people at the right moments. The Whitmore family had been in this county for 40 years. Emily thought about that for a long time. Then she called Marcus Webb. Marcus was a retired attorney who had been a friend of her father's, one of those friendships that survive across decades because the people in it have simply decided they're going to bother no matter what. He was 71 years old, sharp as he had ever been, and he had a particular gift for listening to a situation and identifying the exact point at which it crossed a legal threshold. I need a professional opinion, Emily said when he answered. Then you've called the right person, Marcus said. She talked, he listened. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. What Sandra told you, he said slowly, if it can be documented, recorded, corroborated, even partially what you're describing as tortious interference, potentially extortion at the county level, if the procurement process was influenced, that's civil and potentially criminal territory. That's what I thought, Emily said. The question is documentation, Marcus said. What do you have? A lot, Emily said. I've been building it for 2 weeks. Another pause. Marcus. Emily said, And his voice shifted slightly, the way people's voices do when they stop being professional and become personal. This is serious. This is not a neighbor dispute or a billing disagreement. If the Whitmore family is using county contract leverage to pressure your vendors, you're dealing with something that has real legal teeth. It also has real risk. People with that kind of reach don't lose gracefully. Emily said, "Do you?" he asked. Not unkindly. Directly, Marcus. Emily said, "I know exactly what kind of people don't lose gracefully. I've dealt with them before." He seemed to consider that. "Do you want me to start preparing documentation?" "Yes," she said. "Start immediately. And Marcus, can you move quietly on this? I don't want it surfacing until I say so." He said. She thanked him and hung up. She sat at her desk and thought about Sandra Cho, who had taken a real risk to make a real call. She thought about Jim Palante telling a silver-tongued caller to go to hell. She thought about Ryan Mitchell writing down the description of a man in a parking lot in a spiral notebook because she had asked him to and he trusted her. These were real people, ordinary, decent people who were getting pulled into something they never asked for because one man had wounded pride and too much power and not enough of anyone in his life who had ever said no to him before. Emily picked up the key. She turned it over in her fingers. She walked to the locked storage room, and this time she didn't stand in front of the door and think about it. She put the key in the lock, and she turned it, and she opened the door. It was small, not much bigger than a large closet. She'd converted it years ago when she first came back to Crestfall, when she was still sorting out what she was keeping from who she'd been and what she was leaving behind. Shelf with some files, a waterproof box. And on a hook on the far wall, wrapped in a cloth covering she'd sewn herself to keep the leather from drying out, was the vest. She reached out and pulled the cloth away. It was black leather. At the cuffs and the collar in the specific way that leather wears when it's been lived in, not decorative wear, not manufactured distressing, the honest wear of time and weather and use. On the back, the patches were still crisp, still bold, still exactly what they had always meant. She had earned every single one of them. She didn't put it on, not yet. She looked at it for a long time, the way you look at something that is simultaneously very old and very present. She thought about the woman she had been when she wore it last. The things she had done, the promises she had kept, the people who had trusted her with things that could not be undone. She thought about the phone. She took the vest off the hook very carefully and carried it to her desk. She set it down in front of her. She sat down. She picked up the phone. She found the contact. She pressed call. It rang twice. A man's voice answered. Deep, unhurried. The voice of someone who had been through enough situations that very few things changed his rhythm anymore. "Well," the voice said, "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." Something in Emily's chest shifted. "Danny," she said. "How long has it been?" the voice said. 3 years? 4.5, Emily said. "You sound good," Danny said. Silence. Then, that's the only reason you use this number." He paused. "How serious?" Emily looked at the vest on her desk. She thought about Ryan's face when he told her about the man in the parking lot. She thought about 11 canceled accounts. She thought about Sandra Cho's whispered call and the county warehouse contract, and a man who sat across a table from her that morning with a practiced smile and told her her problems were her own. "It's not an emergency," she said, "but it's serious." "Personal?" Danny asked. "Yes. You need bodies or you need advice?" Emily thought about that question for a moment. So it was a specific kind of question, the kind that only made sense in a specific kind of world. "I need people to know," she said. "That's all. Not action. Presence, just the knowledge in the right places that I'm not alone." Danny was quiet for a few seconds. Emily said, and his voice was different now, warmer. Almost gentle. The way voices get when they're carrying a real feeling they don't usually surface. "You have never been alone. You know that." She didn't answer that. She couldn't quite. "Give me a few days," Danny said. "I'll make some calls." "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "You earned this a long time ago." And he was. "We just haven't had a reason to say it out loud in a while." He hung up. Emily sat at her desk with the vest in front of her and the phone in her hand, and the shop was quiet around her. Outside, the Montana afternoon was doing whatever Montana afternoons do when no one is watching, and she thought about earning things. It cost, what it meant, what it demanded of you, long after the moment of earning had passed. She thought about Logan Whitmore in his chair with his practiced smile. She thought about him calling her problems her own problems. She folded her hands on the desk very calmly and waited. Because the thing that people like Logan never understood, the thing they couldn't understand, because their whole lives had been a process of receiving rather than building, was that loyalty wasn't purchased. It wasn't inherited. It wasn't collected by being rich or being known or by having the right family name in the right small town. It was built. It was built in the cold and in the difficult moments and in the times when doing the right thing cost you something real and you did it anyway. It was built through years of showing up and keeping your word and standing beside people when standing beside them was not the easy or the safe or the convenient choice. Emily Carter had been building hers for over 15 years, and Logan Whitmore had just decided to test it. He had no idea, not even the faintest, most distant idea, what was going to answer. Ryan knocked on the office door at 4:30. "Brake job's done on the Henderson truck," he said. "Anything else before I head out?" Emily looked up. "Oh, good work today," he started to go, then stopped. He turned back. "Emily, whatever it is you're doing, whatever the plan is, are we going to be okay?" She looked at him. She thought about everything she couldn't tell him. Everything that was in motion now that she'd made that phone call, and everything that was coming toward this small town on a road that Logan Whitmore had opened without understanding what was on the other end of it. "Yes," she said, and she meant it. "We're going to be fine." I nodded once. He believed her. She could see it clearly, not the blind belief of someone who doesn't know better, but the considered belief of someone who's watched another person long enough to understand that when they say something, they mean it. He left. Emily turned back to the vest on her desk. "Hey, Danny called back in 2 days, not 3. 2. Emily had said, "Give me a few days," and Danny had apparently decided that 2 was close enough, which told her something she already knew, that whatever she had asked for, however carefully she had framed it as not urgent, the people on the other end of that phone understood the difference between the words someone says and the weight behind them. She was in the garage when the phone rang. She had a transmission job she'd taken on for a rancher-side town, not the kind of work Carter Towing usually did, but the rancher was a good man, and his regular mechanic had moved to Bozeman and left him without options. And Emily had never been the kind of person who turned away a good man with a real problem, just because it was technically outside her lane. She had grease up to her elbows and a flashlight in her teeth, and the phone rang 3 times before she could get to it. She saw the number, wiped her hands on a rag. "Answered," Danny said. "No greeting." "Just that." "That fast," she said. "You'd be surprised how fast people move when your name comes up," he said. "I made 6 calls. 6 calls in 2 days, and I had more than I needed. People have been waiting, Emily, longer than you probably know." She felt something move in her chest that she didn't fully trust herself to examine. "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that you needed people to know you weren't standing alone. That someone had made a mistake about who they were dealing with, and it was time to correct the misunderstanding." A pause. Nobody asked questions, they just asked when. Emily leaned against the workbench. "I don't want this to be a confrontation, Danny. I've told you that." "Presence," Danny said. "I know, you told me presence, and nothing more unless you say otherwise." Another pause, and his voice shifted to something drier and warmer at the same time. "You always did have very specific instructions. People get hurt when instructions aren't specific. That's exactly why everyone always listened to yours," he said, for a moment. "How many?" she asked. "Enough," Danny said. "More than enough." "When do you want them?" Emily thought about Marcus Webb, who was still building the legal documentation. She thought about Ryan, who had been coming to work every day with the determined steadiness of someone who has decided to be brave and is working very hard at it. She thought about Logan Whitmore, who had spent 2 weeks systematically dismantling everything around her with the casual confidence of someone who had never once paid a real price for anything he had done. "Give me 4 days," she said. "I need to be ready on my end." "Days," Danny confirmed. "Emily, you doing okay?" She looked around the garage, at the transmission job half finished, at the wall of certifications, at the schedule board where the week's work was written out in her own handwriting, solid and full, despite the cancellations. She had quietly taken on smaller accounts and roadside calls to cover the gap. She had refused absolutely, and without exception, to let Logan Whitmore's interference show up in the quality of her work or the steadiness of her operation. "I'm doing fine," she said. "Good," Danny said. And the way he said it, she knew he believed her. She went back to the transmission. She worked for another 4 hours. And the whole time something was settling in her, a specific kind of calm that she recognized because she'd felt it before, in situations that made this one look uncomplicated. The calm of a person who has made the decision, who has set the thing in motion, who now has only to wait and work and be exactly who they've always been until the moment arrives. She had always been good at waiting. She had always been better at arriving. On the second of the 4 days, Logan made his next move. She had almost expected it, not the specific move, but the timing of it. People like Logan operated on a rhythm of pressure, and when the first wave of pressure didn't produce the response they expected, they escalated. Predictable. It was also, Emily had to admit, somewhat faster than she'd anticipated. He was either more impatient than she'd read him, or someone in his circle had told him his window was closing. The move came through the county licensing office, named Patricia Fields, called Carter Towing at 10 in the morning, and informed Emily in the careful neutral tones of someone reading from a script they're uncomfortable with that the county had received an anonymous complaint regarding Carter Towing's equipment certifications and was opening a routine compliance review. Emily wrote down everything Patricia said, every word. Then she said, pleasantly, and she was, "Patricia, how many compliance reviews has Carter Towing had in the past 10 years? Let me check, it looks like none. And this complaint was anonymous? That's what the file indicates, yes. Can you tell me when the complaint was filed? Another pause. Longer this time, accompanied by the sound of typing. 11 days ago, Patricia said. 11 days ago was the day after Emily had met Logan in the athletic complex. The day after she had walked in and looked him in the eye and asked him plainly to stop, and he had smiled, his practiced smile, and told her her problems were her own. "Thank you, Patricia," Emily said. "I'll have all documentation ready for your office by end of business tomorrow." "Oh, that's actually faster than we." "Tomorrow," Emily said pleasantly. "No problem." At all, she called Marcus before she'd even hung up with Patricia. "He just triggered a licensing review," she told him. Marcus made a sound that combined professional gravity with personal outrage in equal measure. Through the county. Anonymous complaint filed 11 days ago, the day after you confronted him. The day after. Marcus. Marcus said, "I want to be very clear with you, this is actually good for us. This is a documented escalation with traceable timing. When we tie this to the vendor interference and the intimidation of your employee, we have a pattern. A clear, documented, legally actionable pattern." His voice had the particular energy of a retired attorney who has just remembered how much he loved this. "Can you have your certifications to me today?" "They're already in a folder," Emily said. "Everything. Inspections, maintenance logs, insurance records, equipment certifications. I've been keeping it updated since the cancellation started." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Your father raised you right. He raised me to document everything and trust nobody who smiles too much," Emily said. Marcus laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprises itself. "That's either very wise or very sad." "Probably both," Emily said. She sent him the folder within the hour. Ryan found out about the compliance review from a friend in the county clerk's office before Emily had a chance to tell him herself. He appeared in her office doorway at 2 in the afternoon with the expression of a man who is trying very hard to stay calm and is not entirely succeeding. "Aren't coming after your license?" he said. They're conducting a compliance review, Emily said. Very short review because everything we have is in perfect order and has been for years. But they're doing it because of him. Probably. Probably. Ryan stepped into the office. Emily, you documented everything. So was. You went to see him personally. You have a lawyer working on it. Ahead of every move he makes. He paused. And you're still just working. Every day, same as always. How are you this calm? Emily looked at him. Ryan, she said, have you ever watched someone play chess?
Sure.
A good player doesn't react to every move and respond to the pattern. Logan thinks he's making moves. He's actually just revealing himself. She leaned back in her chair. Every move he makes is documentation. Every call, every complaint, every anonymous filing. He's building my case for me. Ryan stared at her. That's actually terrifying. Only if you're on his side, Emily said. Ryan sat down slowly in the chair across from her. For a moment then, there's something else. I didn't want to tell you because I wasn't sure, but now I think I should. Emily waited. Two of the guys he's been running with the broad ones that were at the gym when you went in? Ryan said. I've seen one of them parked outside the shop. Twice in the last 3 days. Just sitting. Not doing anything, just watching. The room was very still. Side of the lot? Emily asked. West side. By the fence. Description of the vehicle? Dark blue pickup. Montana plates, I wrote down the number. He pulled out his phone and read it to her. Emily wrote it down. She kept her voice perfectly even. You did the right thing telling me. Write it in the documentation log with times and dates. And Emily, his voice dropped. They're watching the shop. That feels like a line being crossed. It is a line being crossed, she said, and it's documented. What if they... Ryan, she looked at him directly, calmly, with the specific steadiness of someone who is choosing what to project because they understand that what they project is what the person across from them will feel. Nothing is going to happen to you. I need you to believe that, not because I'm trying to make you feel better, but because it is factually true. Nobody is going to touch you. He looked at her for a long time. How do you know? He asked, because Emily said, I've made some arrangements. Ryan opened his mouth, closed it, looked at her with those earnest eyes that missed very little despite his youth. What kind of arrangements? Emily just looked at him. He understood that she wasn't going to answer that. He also seemed to understand from the way she held herself and the particular quality of the calm in her voice that the arrangements were real and they were serious and they were enough. And he said quietly, go home, she said. Get a good night's sleep. The next couple of days are going to be busy, dude. He stopped at the door. Without turning around, he said, I trust you. I just want you to know that. Emily waited until his footsteps faded and the side door closed. Then she sat alone in her office for a moment with the documentation folder in front of her and the vest on its hook in the storage room and Danny's number in her personal phone and the quiet, building certainty of someone who has seen the end of the road ahead and is walking toward it without flinching. 2 more days. The compliance inspector came the next morning. He was a man named Gerald Oates, 40s, tired looking, carrying a clipboard with the energy of someone who had been assigned a job he already knew was going to be a waste of time. He introduced himself politely. Emily offered coffee. He accepted. She walked him through every piece of documentation she had, organized by category and date, in a binder she had prepared the night before with labeled tabs. Old Oates was a professional. He did his job properly, checking what he was supposed to check, asking what he was supposed to ask. About 20 minutes in, something shifted in his manner, a slight loosening of the practice neutrality. He flipped back to the beginning of the binder and looked at the first tab again. He said, this documentation is its thorough. Thank you, she said. I mean, very thorough. Most operations have their records, but this is organized in a way that suggests you anticipated this review. I keep everything current, Emily said. My father always said the only protection an honest business has is an honest record. Gerald looked at her. He was a man who had been doing compliance reviews for a long time. He had the look of someone who had learned to read situations beyond their stated surface. He said carefully, I'm going to tell you Something that isn't in my official capacity. This complaint, the anonymous one, I've seen the language. I've seen how it was filed. It has a particular fingerprint to it. Not the first time I've seen something like it. Emily waited very carefully. I'm not saying anything official, Gerald said. I'm saying unofficially that the people who file this kind of complaint usually do so because they expect the review to create disruption, to take up your time, to create uncertainty in your business relationships. He paused. Your records are going to make this review very brief, probably the briefest I've done this year. How long will the process take? Emily asked. I can close it out within 48 hours, Gerald said. Clean result. No findings. I appreciate that. He looked at her again. That reading look. I hope, he said quietly, that whatever else is going on here resolves itself. Emily looked at him steadily. It will, she said. He finished his coffee. He collected his clipboard. He shook her hand. And his handshake was firmer than the handshake of a man running out a routine review. And she understood that he was being, in the limited way available to him, a decent human being in an indecent situation. She appreciated that more than she showed. After he left, she called Marcus. My view's going to close clean, she said. 48 hours. No findings. It's expected, Marcus said. Then Emily, the documentation package is ready. Everything, the vendor interference, the intimidation incident with Ryan, timing correlation between your confrontation with Logan and the complaint filing. Sandra Cho's statement, she agreed to provide a written one. By the way, I spoke to her this morning. Sandra agreed, Emily said. She was very clear that she wanted to, Marcus said. I'm tired of people with money using it to step on people who work for theirs. He paused. She's braver than she probably knows. Emily thought about Sandra Cho making that whispered phone call, taking that risk, deciding that being decent mattered more than being safe. When can we file? Emily asked. Whenever you say, Marcus said. I'd recommend a simultaneous approach civil filing and a copy delivered directly to the county sheriff's office, given the intimidation element. Emily, I want to make sure you understand what happens when this goes public. The Whitmore name is going to take a real hit. Logan's going to know it came from you. People around him are going to know. I know, Emily said. And you're prepared for that? She looked at the wall. She thought about tomorrow, about Danny's call, about what was coming down the highway in 4 days, which was now, she realized, tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, she said. Thursday morning. Thursday morning, Marcus confirmed. May I ask why Thursday specifically? Because by Thursday, Emily said, the situation will be very clear to everyone involved. Quiet for a moment. All right, he said. He trusted her. The way people trust someone when the evidence of their judgment has been consistent and long. Thursday morning, she thanked him and hung up. She looked at the clock. 2 hours. She went back to work. Logan got the call at 7 that evening. She didn't know the specifics of what he was told, or who told him. She knew he got a call because 30 minutes later, his car pulled up in the lot outside Carter, towing not the dark blue pickup that had been watching the shop, but Logan's own vehicle, the replacement luxury truck he'd bought after the fuel pump incident, which struck Emily as the kind of detail that said a great deal about a person. And he walked in through the front door without knocking. Ryan was still there, finishing up the day's paperwork. He looked up, saw Logan, and stood up from his desk with the instinctive straightening of a young man who feels a threat entering the room. Her here? Logan said. I'll get her, Ryan said carefully. Emily came out from the back. She had heard the door. She stood at the threshold between the garage and the office and looked at Logan and waited. Logan looked different from the last time she'd seen him. Practiced ease was still there, but it was sitting on top of something else now, something tighter and less controlled. His jaw was set. He had the look of a man who had just been told something that disturbed his internal picture of how things were going. I heard you've been talking to a lawyer, he said. I talk to lawyers when I have legal matters, Emily said. That's a mistake, Logan said. Which part? Any of it. He walked further into the office, shifted his position slightly, not moving toward Logan, but moving in a way that said he was present and paying attention. Logan glanced at him, then back at Emily. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly. Things in motion that you don't fully understand. People with relationships in this county that go back 40 years. You don't win this. Emily looked at him. What would winning look like to you? She asked. The question seemed to throw him. What? What would winning look like? If this goes the way you expect, you've damaged my business, you've intimidated my employee, you've filed false complaints with county licensing. Say all of that succeeds. Say I fold. What have you won? Logan stared at her. A woman who thinks she can embarrass my family learns otherwise. Was very still. Emily looked at him for a long moment, long enough that the silence came a thing with weight and shape. Then she said, your father was a great boxer, Logan. Did you know what made him great? It wasn't power. Every fighter has power. It was the fact that he could read a fight. He could tell 3 rounds in whether he was winning or losing and what he needed to change. She paused. You can't read this fight. I'm not interested in philosophy from a tow truck driver, he said. No, she agreed. I don't imagine you are. But you're here at 7 in the evening in my shop because someone called you and you felt scared enough to come in person. That's not the behavior of someone who's winning. She tilted her head slightly. It's the behavior of someone who just realized they might have made a mistake. Logan's eyes narrowed. I'm going to make one thing very clear. Logan, Emily said quietly. And something in her voice changed, not louder, not harder, but deeper. Something that came from a place so far down that it took him a second to process it. I need you to think very carefully about what you say next. He stopped. He looked at her. And for the first time, not at the roadside, not at the athletic complex, not in any of the interactions they'd had in the past several weeks, Logan Whitmore had the distinct, unsettling sensation that he was not in control of this conversation, that he was not, in fact, in control of this situation at all, that the woman standing across from him was not responding to him the way people responded to him, not because she was unintelligent or uninformed, but because she was operating from a position he couldn't see and couldn't map. He didn't know what to do with that feeling. He never had. You should go home, Emily said. Still quiet, still completely steady. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a complicated day for both of us, and I think you should be rested for it. Logan stood there for another 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked out, swung shut behind him. Ryan let out a breath. What happens tomorrow? He asked. Emily looked at the closed door. Somewhere, far outside, she could have sworn she heard something. Not an engine, not yet too far away, still miles down the road. Something. A low vibration in the air, like the first pressure change before weather moves in. Like the sky taking a breath before it decides what it's going to do. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe. Tomorrow, Emily said, things become clear. She barely slept that night. Not because of fear. She was past fear. She had moved through fear and out the other side into that specific territory that exists beyond it, where a person is simply fully awake to what is happening and what is about to happen. She lay in bed in her house, a small house, modestly furnished, nothing on the walls except a photograph of her father and a framed work order from the shop's first year, and she stared at the ceiling and let the hours pass. She thought about her father, about the shop he'd built from one truck and stubbornness and a reputation for honesty. How he used to say, the only thing worth having is the kind of respect that doesn't need explaining. People either feel it or they don't. And if they don't, there's nothing you can tell them that will make it real. She thought about the first time she'd ridden with Danny, 12 years ago. A cold road, another state, a situation considerably more dangerous than a county licensing complaint. She had been 26 and unafraid in the way that very young people are unafraid, not because they've assessed the risk, but because they haven't yet accumulated enough loss to fully appreciate what loss means. She was different now. She had accumulated plenty of loss. Father. 3 years of her life she'd spent in the kind of world that left marks. The decision to come back, to be quiet, to take up less space, to build something small and solid in hers. She didn't regret any of it, not the life she'd lived before, not the life she'd chosen after. They were both hers, both real, both part of the same person who got up every morning and went to work and did honest things and stood by the people who stood by her. At 5 in the morning, she got up. She showered. She dressed. And she made coffee and drank it standing in her kitchen. And she called Ryan and told him to come in at 6 instead of 8 because she needed someone she trusted at the shop before things got complicated. Ryan answered on the first ring, fully awake, as if he'd been lying there waiting for it. "I'll be there at 5:45, he said. She drove to the shop as the sky was just beginning its negotiation with the sun. She unlocked the garage. She made more coffee. She stood at the workbench and looked at nothing in particular for a few minutes, in the way of someone who is gathering themselves before something significant, and arrived at 5:43. He came in, poured himself coffee, stood beside her at the workbench. He was. They didn't talk for a little while. That was one of the things Emily had always appreciated about Ryan. He had learned when silence was the right contribution. Then at 6:15, Emily's personal phone buzzed. Danny, 4 words, an hour out. Ready? Emily looked at the message. She set the phone face up on the workbench so Ryan could see it. She watched his face as he read it. She watched his brow furrow. He was. And then clear. And then a strange, complex expression moved through his features, something between apprehension and the particular electric aliveness that people feel when they're about to witness something they've never seen before. "Any?" Ryan asked. Emily picked up the phone. She typed back, "Ready." Then she looked at Ryan and said, "Someone who's been waiting a long time to show up," and opened his mouth. He closed it. He drank his coffee. The shop was quiet around them, and the road outside was empty. And the morning was as still as mornings get in Montana in October, and which is very still, which is almost entirely still, which is specific stillness that exists in the moments before something changes everything. They waited. And then at 7:12 in the morning, Ryan cocked his head and was, "Do you hear that?" he said. Emily heard it. She had been hearing it for about 40 seconds already, building at the edge of perception, coming from the direction of the main highway. Not one engine, not 2, not 10. The sound was low and rhythmic and growing. The way a tide sounds when you're standing on a beach and the water is still 100 yards out, but you can feel it coming through the ground beneath your feet. And looked at her. "Emily," he said slowly, "what is that?" Emily set down her coffee cup. She straightened up. For the first time in weeks, something moved across her face that was not strategic patience or focused calm or careful steadiness. Something warmer than all of those things and older and real. Emily Carter said quietly, is the answer to a question Logan Whitmore never thought to ask. Sound grew. Ryan stood completely still, coffee cup halfway to his mouth, listening. The kind of sound that you felt before you fully heard it, a deep, layered vibration that seemed to come from the road itself, from the earth under the asphalt, somewhere below ordinary sound. It built the way a storm builds when you're inland and can't see the sky, but you feel the pressure changing. And, in some animal part of yourself, that something significant is coming. Ryan put his coffee down. "How many?" he said. Emily didn't answer immediately. She was listening too, not with the wide-eyed attention of someone encountering something unexpected, but with the focus, receiving stillness of someone counting, measuring that what was arriving matched what she had asked for. "Enough," she said. That was what Danny had said. Enough. Than enough. She had believed him then. She believed him now. Engine sound separated itself from the collective rumble and became specific. She could hear individual bikes now, distinguishable from each other, each one a slightly different voice in a very large chorus. Ryan walked to the window. Then he walked to the front door and opened it, because a window wasn't enough. The road outside Carter Towing was a 2-lane county road that saw maybe 200 vehicles on a busy day. It was not a road that had ever needed to accommodate what was currently turning onto it from the main highway. And counted under his breath. He stopped counting at 30 because the line was still coming. Emily said, And his voice had gone very quiet in the way voices go quiet when the brain is processing something faster than language can keep up with. There are a lot of people out there. I know, Emily said. She had put on the vest that morning. Early. Before Ryan arrived, before the coffee was finished brewing, she had taken it from the hook in the storage room and put it on over her work shirt, and it had fit the way it always fit, like something that had been made for her specifically, which in a way it had been, because she had earned every patch on it through specific acts in specific moments. And those patches were a language that certain people read fluently and most people never learned at all. She walked to the door. She stepped outside. Riders were pulling into the lot with the unhurried precision of people who have ridden together long enough that they don't need to think about how they move as a group. It just happens, organically, like a murmuration. They filled the lot. Some parked along the road. Some stayed on their bikes, engines idling down to a low, patient rumble. Some dismounted and stood. All of them looked at Emily Carter. Man came and stood beside her, and she could feel him working very hard to keep his face steady and professional, to not visibly communicate the fact that his heart was doing something accelerated and complicated in his chest. A man separated himself from the group and walked toward her. And he was. Danny Reeves was 54 years old, built like someone who had spent his life being physically capable and had never seen a reason to stop. He had a gray-streaked beard and eyes that had the particular quality of eyes that have seen a great many things and sorted them all into categories of importance with long practice. He walked with a slight hitch in his left knee that he'd had since an accident in his late 30s and that he had never once complained about. He stopped in front of Emily. He looked at the vest. Something moved in his face, slow, deep, the expression of a man who has been carrying a feeling for a long time and is finally allowed to set it down. "Wearing it," he said. "I'm wearing it," she said. He nodded once, with the gravity of someone acknowledging something that required gravity. Then he held out his hand. She shook it. He pulled her in briefly, the way people do when a handshake isn't enough, and a full embrace says more than is needed. Just a moment, just enough. And then they stepped back and were professional again. "We were wondering," Danny said, "when you'd finally call." "I waited as long as I could," Emily said. "You always do," he said. Not a criticism. Just a known fact about her, stated with the ease of long familiarity. "What do you need from us today?" "Presence," Emily said. "Same as I told you. Nothing more unless the situation changes." And he nodded. "And if the situation changes, I'll tell you." Understood. He glanced at Ryan, who had been very still and very quiet in the careful manner of a young man who is trying to be professional in circumstances that are testing the outer limits of that professionalism. "Ryan Mitchell," Emily said. "He's been with me 18 months. He's solid." Danny looked at Ryan directly. "She vouches for you," he said. "That means something." Swallowed. "Yes, sir," he said, which was not a thing he usually said to people, but felt appropriate. Danny almost smiled. He looked back at Emily. "What time do you expect the situation to develop?" Emily looked at her phone. It was 7:38. She had sent Marcus a text at 6:30 confirming Thursday morning for the legal filing. This had confirmed 9 o'clock. Logan would likely be notified by his family's attorney within 30 minutes of the filing, which meant morning, she said. Maybe sooner, depending on how fast his people move. "Not going anywhere," Danny said. He looked back at his people, all of them patient, all of them present, all of them understanding without being told that the role today was witness, not aggressor. They had all known Emily Carter, some of them for years, some for over a decade. They know how she operated. They knew what her presence meant and what her absence had cost them in those years she'd been in Crest Fall, driving a tow truck and living quietly. They weren't here to fight. They were here because she had called, and that was sufficient. And the reason was sufficient, and anyone who had a problem with that would need to take it up with all of them at once. "Thank you," Emily said to Danny. "Stop thanking me," Danny said. "It makes me feel like a favor." "This isn't a favor." He looked at her steadily. "You know what this is?" She did. She turned and went back inside. And followed her, closed the door, and stood there for a moment in the way of someone who needs a second to reorganize their understanding of reality. Emily, he said. Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I know. Are you going to answer any of them? She walked to her desk and sat down. She looked at him, asked the most important one. Ryan thought about it. He was quiet for almost 30 seconds, which told her he was actually choosing carefully. Then he said, you the same person I've worked for the last 18 months. Emily held his gaze. Every single day, she said, and who took your call when you applied for this job, and who showed you how to properly secure a load so it doesn't shift on the highway, and who told you that an honest record is the only protection an honest business has. She paused. Every version of me you've seen here is real. There are just more versions than you knew about. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. Okay. Okay, he said again, which more as if he'd made a decision. I'm going to make more coffee because I think today is a multiple pot kind of day. And I'm going to answer any phones that ring because that's my job. And I'm going to trust you because that's what I do. He paused at the coffee maker. At some point, when all of this is over, you're going to sit down and tell me the whole story. At some point, Emily agreed. Ryan nodded. Good enough. He made the coffee. The call from Marcus came at 8:57. Confirmed, Marcus said. 9:03. It'll be in the system. Civil suit. Tortious interference. Evidence of coordinated vendor intimidation. Documentation of the anonymous complaints. Timing correlation. All of it. Clean and comprehensive. A pause. Emily, I want to prepare you. Once this is in the system, it becomes public record. Reporters occasionally monitor those filings. If anyone picks it up, it could move fast. That's fine, Emily said. You're certain? Marcus, she said, I've been careful and quiet for 8 years. I've been careful and quiet for the past 3 weeks. I'm done being careful and quiet. A beat. All right, he said. Godspeed. The filing went in at 9:03. Emily knew the exact moment because she was watching the clock and because at 9:07 her personal phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. And when she answered, a man's voice she'd never heard before said tightly and without preamble, "This is Richard Holloway. I'm the Whitmore family's legal counsel. I need to speak to Emily Carter." Speaking, Emily said. A brief pause, the pause of someone recalibrating because they expected to reach a receptionist or a machine. Miss Carter, Holloway said, with the controlled precision of an expensive attorney who has been woken up by an urgent call and is now managing a situation he finds unpleasant. I'm calling as a courtesy. Before this proceeds any further. Already proceeded, Emily said. Miss Carter, I strongly advise you. Only was, Mr. Holloway. Emily said, with the same courtesy and considerably more authority. I have documentation of coordinated vendor interference affecting 11 separate business accounts. I have a written statement from one of those vendors specifically naming the use of county contract leverage as coercion. I have documentation of the intimidation of my employee. I have the timing correlation between my direct confrontation with your client and his anonymous complaint to county licensing, which a compliance inspector has already closed with no findings. She paused. The attorney has all of it. The court has all of it. What exactly were you calling to advise me? The silence on the other end of the line was very particular. It was the silence of a man who had been preparing for one conversation and found himself in a completely different one. Miss Carter, Holloway said finally, and his voice had changed, still professional, but the aggressive certainty was gone from it, replaced by something more careful. I think it would be in everyone's interest to discuss this before it escalates further. I'm happy to discuss it, Emily said. Have your client call me directly. Intermediaries. That's not typically, Mr. Holloway. Her voice was pleasant, absolutely pleasant, and absolutely immovable. Tell Logan to call me, personally. If he'd like to have a conversation about what happens next, I'm here. If he'd prefer to let this play out in civil court, that's also fine with me. She paused. But the time for intermediaries was 3 weeks ago. She ended the call. Ryan looked up from his desk. Was that his lawyer? It's fast. It was, Emily said, which means Logan was already watching for it. He knew the filing was coming. She thought about that, which means someone told him, which means someone in the county clerk's office tipped him off. She picked up her pen and added that to her documentation notes because it was another data point because she was Emily Carter and she documented everything. Stared at her. You're adding that to the file right now? In the middle of everything? And he was. Especially in the middle of everything, Emily said. Logan arrived at 11:17. He didn't call ahead. He didn't send Holloway. He came himself, alone, which was the first genuinely surprising thing he had done since this entire situation began. Emily had expected another intermediary, another layer of insulation, another carefully managed distance. Instead, she heard the car in the lot, looked up, and through the window she could see Logan getting out of his truck and standing there for a moment, just standing, not moving. And she understood that the sight of the bikes, the riders, and the sheer undeniable physical presence of what was parked in and around her lot had done something to his internal picture of the situation. She went to the door. She stood in the doorway and waited. Logan walked toward her. He moved differently than he had moved every other time she'd seen him. The particular ease was gone, not replaced by fear exactly, but by a quality of suspension. The man who has stepped onto ground he thought was solid and is now testing every footfall. He stopped 10 feet from her. He looked at the bikes. He looked at the people. He looked at their faces, which looked back at him with the collective, unhurried patience of people who have nowhere to be except exactly where they are. He looked at Emily. He looked at the vest. His face did something complicated. I didn't know, he said. It came out quieter than he probably intended. I know you didn't, Emily said. You never, he stopped. You never said anything. You just acted like you were. Like I was a tow truck driver, Emily said. Logan's jaw worked. Like you were someone ordinary. I am ordinary, Emily said. Stop, that's my employee. I run an honest business in a small town and I do my job well, and I treat people fairly. She met his eyes. That's ordinary. Everything else is just additional context. Logan looked at Danny, who was standing about 15 feet away with his arms crossed, and the patient expression of a man who has agreed to let Emily run her own conversation and is keeping that agreement comfortably. Are they? Logan said. People who trust me, Emily said. People I've stood beside. People who know what it means when I call, because in all the years I've known them, I've only called when it mattered. Logan absorbed that. What do you want? He said. And the question was different from any question he'd asked her before, stripped of performance, stripped of the practiced ease, stripped of the family name and the expectation of deference. He was asking genuinely because he was standing in front of something he didn't understand, and he had finally run out of the confidence that usually substituted for understanding. Restoration, Emily said. Not revenge, not humiliation. Restoration. She took one step closer. You made calls. You pressured businesses. You filed a false complaint with county licensing. Someone follow and threaten my employee. She let each item land before moving to the next. I want those businesses released. I want a written apology delivered to Ryan Mitchell. And I want you to go to the county clerk's office and correct the record on that complaint personally. Logan stared at her. And if I do that, then I have a conversation with my attorney about the civil filing, Emily said. I'm not promising dismissal. That depends on whether the restoration is complete and genuine. I'm giving you the opportunity to make it right before a judge decides what right looks like. Actually, he stopped. You'd actually let it go? Logan, Emily said. And there was something in her voice that was almost gentle, not soft, not sympathetic, but genuine. The way you can be genuine with someone you don't particularly like when you're saying something true. I didn't want this. I never wanted this. I wanted to charge you $340 for an honest tow and a fuel pump and send you on your way. She paused. You made this something else. I'm giving you the choice to unmake it. Quiet for a long moment. Around them, the morning was doing what October mornings in Montana do, clear and cold and very still, the kind of stillness that amplifies small sounds. Someone's engine ticked softly. A boot shifted on asphalt. The everyday sounds of an everyday morning, wrapped around something that was not everyday at all. Logan looked at Danny again. Danny met his look without expression, threatening, not aggressive, simply present, in the way that mountains are present without agenda, for instance, without performance, simply there, simply real, and not going anywhere. If I told you who I was from the beginning, Emily said, would you have treated me differently? Logan turned back to her. She watched his face as the question worked through him, watched him start to form the reflexive answer, the easy answer, and then watched that answer dissolve because he was smarter than he sometimes acted. And he knew in this moment with this woman that the easy answer was also the false one. The true answer was, yes, he would have been different if he'd known. If he had understood in that first moment on the dark highway that the woman climbing out of the tow truck was someone with this kind of weight behind her, he would have been carefully respectful and professionally courteous and entirely different in every way. And that was the problem. That was the whole problem contained in a single honest answer. He would have been different because of what she had, not because of who she was, because of the power she could access, not because of the person she actually was, the person who showed up on cold highways and itemized every receipt and treated every customer exactly the same and told a man in an expensive truck that his father's name didn't change her prices. He would have respected the vest. He had never respected the woman. I don't know, Logan said quietly. And Emily looked at him and she nodded slowly because it was the most honest thing he had said to her since the beginning of all of this. And honesty, even when it was unflattering, even when it was late, was still worth acknowledging. The right answer, she said. Logan blinked. The right answer isn't yes, Emily said. The right answer is I don't know, and I should have. Because the question of how you treat someone shouldn't change based on who's standing behind them. It should be the same regardless. She held his gaze. That's what you got wrong. Not who I am, what you assumed I wasn't. The silence stretched. Ryan, who had come to stand in the doorway behind Emily, very still and very quiet, and his face had the expression of a young man who is in the middle of learning something he will carry for the rest of his life. Logan looked at the ground, then he looked up. What happens if I do what you're asking, and it doesn't if the businesses don't come back? If the relationships are already too damaged, then I run my business, Emily said. Same as I've been doing. I'll find new accounts. I'll rebuild what I lost. I've done harder things. She paused. But that's my problem to solve, not yours to worry about. Your problem is simple. Do you want to do the right thing or not? Logan stood there. 15 seconds. 20. 30. Danny had not moved. The riders had not moved. The morning had not moved. Everything was suspended in the specific stillness of a moment, waiting to find out what kind of moment it was going to be. Then Logan said, I'll call Richard. Tell him to cooperate with your attorney. He said it like a man swallowing something that didn't go down easily. I'll contact the businesses. And Ryan, Emily said. Logan glanced at Ryan in the doorway. And your employee, he said. Yes. Written apology. And the county clerk, Emily said. And the county clerk, Logan repeated. The air changed, dramatically, not the way it changes in movies, with a visible shift in light or a sudden sound. Just quietly, the way a room feels different when a window opens. The tension didn't disappear. It changed shape from something confrontational to something that was resolving, slowly and imperfectly, and in the real-world way that resolution actually happens, which is never clean and never quite what anyone pictured. I have one question, Logan said. Emily waited. Why didn't you just tell me? From the start? If you knew who you were, who you had behind you, why not just lead with that? You would have backed off, Emily said. Yes, and I would never have known anything true about you, and nothing would have changed. She held his gaze. I don't want people to treat me with respect because of what I have access to, Logan. I want them to treat me with respect because I earned it, because I'm standing in front of them doing honest work, and that's enough of a reason. She paused. If you'd treated me decently because you were afraid of Danny and 40 bikes, you wouldn't have learned anything. Was. And the next person he looked at the next tow truck driver, the next small town business owner, the next person in ordinary clothes doing ordinary work. You'd have treated them exactly the same way you treated me at the start. Quiet. So yes, Emily said, I let it go further than I wanted it to. I let it get uncomfortable for me and for my employee and for businesses I've had relationships with for years. Because the only lesson worth having is the one you actually feel. She watched his face. Something moved across it, slow, deep, the specific expression of a person encountering an idea that is reorganizing something internal. Not an easy expression, not a comfortable one, but a real one. And Emily had been around enough people in enough situations to know the difference between a man performing realization and a man actually having one. Logan Whitmore was in this moment actually having one. It wouldn't be complete. These things never were, not in a single conversation, not in a single morning in a parking lot with the sound of engines ticking cool all around you. But it was real. It was the start of something real, which was more than Emily had necessarily expected. I didn't come here planning to say any of this, Logan said. I know, Emily said. I came because he stopped. I came because I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. And I thought if I came in person, I would. He stopped again. Looked at Danny, looked at the riders, looked at Emily. I thought it would be different. Different how? I thought you'd be, he exhaled. I thought you'd want something. Probably. Or a formal apology in front of all these people. Something that could be filmed or shared. Kind of performance. I told you, Emily said. I don't do performances. Logan almost smiled. It was small and complicated and nothing like the practiced smiles she'd seen from him before. He said, you really don't. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked at the ground. Then he looked up. I'm going to go call Richard, he said. And then I'm going to make a list of the calls I made 3 weeks ago, and I'm going to call them back. He paused. All of them. That's all I asked, Emily said. He nodded. He looked one more time at the assembled group, at Danny, at the Burns, who gave him nothing, at the riders, who gave him nothing, at Ryan, who was watching him with the alert curiosity of someone who is still deciding what to think, and then he walked back to his truck. Danny came to stand beside Emily. They both watched Logan get in his vehicle. Danny said, yeah. Emily said, that wasn't what I expected. What did you expect? Danny considered. More resistance. Ego. He folded faster than he paused. He's not all bad, is he? Oh, Emily said. He's not all bad. He's someone who was never told no by anyone who could back it up. She watched the truck pull out of the lot. Nobody did him any favors letting him get this far without someone pushing back. I did. Cost you something, Danny said. Cost me some accounts and 3 weeks of stress, Emily said. I've paid higher prices for less important things. And he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you gonna be okay? She looked at him. At the riders behind him, 53 of them, she had counted while Logan was talking. 53 people who had answered a phone call and gotten on their bikes and driven to a small town in Montana because Emily Carter had called, was a thing she was still, even now, working to fully absorb. She said, we're going to be fine. Danny looked at the shop, at the sign, at the years of it visible in the wear of the building and the quality of the equipment and the organization that said this place is run by someone who cares about doing it right. Your father would have liked to see this, Danny said. Emily felt something move in her chest, something she didn't try to push down. He would have complained about the paperwork, she said. He laughed. A real one, deep and warm. Several of the riders nearby looked over and smiled without knowing exactly why. Danny said, he would have. He turned to her. You need us to stay? Emily thought about it. Give me an hour. Let me see what comes back from Logan's attorney. If it's moving the right direction, you can go. And if it's not, then we figure out the next step, she said. Danny nodded. He went back to his people. Emily heard him speaking to them, low, brief, a few sentences, and she saw them settle into the particular waiting posture of people who are comfortable with patience, and that some situations resolve quickly and some take time, and that neither outcome is improved by impatience. She turned and went back inside. Ryan was at his desk, phone in hand, looking at her with an expression that had several layers to it. He's actually going to do it, Ryan said. Isn't he? I think so, Emily said. Why? What changed? Emily sat down at her desk. She thought about how to say it. She thought about Logan's face when he asked why she hadn't led with who she was. She thought about the moment the honest answer, "I don't know," had come out of him, and the recognition that had followed it, slow and real. He came here expecting to be afraid of them, she said, nodding toward the window, toward the lot outside, and he was. But then he realized that wasn't the point. Standing in front of me, not them. She paused. Finally saw me. Not the company I keep, not the vest. Me. And I think for maybe the first time in this whole situation, he understood that's where the problem started. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Is that enough to make someone change? Emily looked at her documentation folder. At the legal filing Marcus had sent in at 9:03. At the notes she'd taken over 3 weeks of careful, patient, deliberate action. Enough to start, she said. Whether it lasts, that's on him. Her phone rang. Marcus, she answered. Richard Holloway just called me, Marcus said, and his voice was doing the thing it did when he was trying to stay professionally measured and was having some difficulty with it. He's proposing a resolution framework, full restoration of vendor relationships, written correction to the county compliance record, and, he paused, he's proposing that Logan deliver personal apologies to the affected vendors directly, form letters, personal calls. Emily sat very still. What I asked for, she said. No, Marcus said. It appears Logan added it himself. The room was quiet. Ryan looked at Emily. Emily looked at the wall. She thought about a man in a parking lot outside a small shop in Montana, standing in front of 53 people who came because someone called out for the first time in his life that the way you treated people when you thought they were powerless was the truest possible measure of who you were. She thought about her father saying, the only thing worth having is the kind of respect that doesn't need explaining. Al Holloway, yes, she said. And the civil filing? Tell him I'll have an answer by end of business today, pending Logan's follow-through on the vendor calls. Emily said, this is in my professional opinion. This is a good outcome. Emily said. What's the difference? She thought about Ryan's question, whether it was enough to make someone change. A good outcome, she said, is when things go back to the way they were. A start is when something moves in a direction it couldn't have moved before. She paused. I'll take the start. Marx was quiet for a moment. Then your father definitely raised you right. She thanked him. She hung up. She sat at her desk and looked at the vest on the hook on the storage room door, which she had left open that morning for the first time in years. Matches, the wear on the cuffs, the weight of everything it represented and everything it had cost and everything it still meant to people who understood its language. She thought about the locked room, about the choice 3 weeks ago to open the door, about the key that had lived in her pocket for days before she used it. She had never been ashamed of who she was. She had simply been selective about when she let it be visible. And there was a difference, a real and important difference between shame and choice. She had chosen quiet. She had chosen ordinary. She had chosen a small town and honest work and oil-stained jeans and the particular dignity of a life that didn't require anyone else's validation to be real. All of it was hers. Every version of it. She reached out and gently closed the storage room door. Not because she was putting it away, because it was hers to put wherever she wanted it. And right now, in this moment, on this day, she simply didn't need it on display anymore. The situation had resolved, the lesson had been delivered, and Emily Carter had a shop to run. Marcus called at 3:17 that afternoon. Emily was under a truck, not metaphorically, literally, back on the creeper, with a flashlight between her teeth and an oil filter in her hand, because the work didn't stop for moral reckonings or legal filings or 53 motorcycle riders in a parking lot. It was work. That was the whole point. Ryan knocked twice on the floor beside her, Webb on the shop line. She rolled out, wiped her hands. Marcus took the call. "They're moving," Marcus said, and his voice had the particular quality of a man who has practiced law for 40 years and still gets a specific kind of satisfaction when things move the way they should. Holloway confirmed. Logan started the vendor calls at 1 o'clock. He's called 7 of the 11 accounts already. I've had 3 of them call me independently to confirm they said he was, and I'm going to use their word here, different. Emily leaned against the workbench. Different how? At Meridian Freight, Sandra Cho. She called me directly. She said he apologized for 20 minutes. She said she didn't expect it to be real, and then it was. Marcus paused. She cried a little. "Emily, she didn't want me to tell you that, but I'm telling you anyway, because it matters." Emily looked at the wall. Sandra Cho, who had whispered into a phone at risk to herself. Sandra Cho, who had told Marcus she was tired of people with money stepping on people who worked for theirs. Sandra Cho, crying on the phone because a man she had reason to distrust had turned out to be capable of something genuine after all. "She made this possible," Emily said. "Her call gave us the county contract connection. Without that, we didn't have the full picture." "I'll pass that along," Marcus said. "Don't," Emily said. "I'll tell her myself." Marcus made a sound of approval. "The county clerk, Peace Logan, is scheduled at the clerk's office tomorrow morning at 9. Holloway has confirmed. That leaves the written apology to Ryan. Holloway said by end of day today." Emily looked at Ryan, who was pretending not to listen from his desk with the unconvincing focus of someone who is absolutely listening. "I'll let Ryan know." "Emily." Marcus's voice shifted to something more personal. "How are you doing with all of this?" She thought about the question. Real question. Asked by someone who actually wanted to know. "I'm tired," she said honestly. "Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. That comes from holding something heavy for a long time and finally being able to put it down." "That's a reasonable kind of tired," Marcus said. "I know. You did this right," he said. "Every step. Your father would have..." He stopped himself. Way people stop themselves when the sentence becomes too much to finish cleanly. "I know," Emily said again. Softer this time. She thanked him. She hung up. She stood there for a moment with her hand still on the phone, and the shop was quiet around her, and she let herself feel it, the weight that had been sitting in her chest for 3 weeks. The specific gravity of a situation that demanded constant vigilance, constant documentation, constant steadiness. She let herself feel it lifting. Not completely, not all at once. These things never fully lifted all at once. But enough. Now, enough. 7 down, Ryan said from his desk. He had given up, pretending not to listen. 7 down, she agreed. Sandra Cho called Marcus. Emily looked at him. "That part, I have good ears." He paused. "To call her yourself?" "Yes." Ryan nodded. Quiet for a moment. Then Emily. "When does this actually end? Like, when is it over?" She thought about that. She thought about Logan at the county clerk's office tomorrow morning, correcting a record he'd manipulated with an anonymous complaint filed the day after she'd looked him in the eye. She thought about the civil filing sitting in the court system, its fate still contingent on follow-through. She thought about 11 accounts, 7 of which were already moving back, 4 still outstanding. All 11 accounts are restored, and I've had 48 hours to confirm it's genuine, she said. And when Ryan gets his apology, Ryan looked at his computer screen. "And the civil filing? If all of that happens the way it should, I'll dismiss it." Ryan swung around in his chair to face her fully. "You'd let him completely off?" "Off," Emily said. "What he did had consequences. He lost 3 weeks of his life managing a situation he created. His family attorney had to restructure his entire week. Reputation in this county has shifted. People know what happened, even if it never goes to court. The consequences." She paused. "I'm not interested in punishing him. I'm interested in the situation being right." Ryan looked at her for a long, searching moment. I don't think I could do that," he said. "Be that measured. After everything." "You could," Emily said. "You just haven't had to yet." He absorbed that. Then his computer chimed. He turned, looked at the screen, and went very still. Emily said. "Email," Ryan said slowly. "From a Richard Holloway-esque to me." He looked at her. "It's the apology." Emily crossed the room and stood beside him. She read it over his shoulder. It was one page, not long, not elaborate, not filled with the lawyerly hedging language of someone trying to apologize while legally protecting himself. It was plain. It was specific. It named what had happened following him, the warning in the parking lot, the use of implied threat to pressure a 23-year-old who had done nothing wrong. It acknowledged that this was unacceptable, that it had been directed by Logan and not by the man who delivered the message, and that Ryan Mitchell deserved better than to have been made a pawn in someone else's conflict. It ended with one sentence that had no legal language in it at all. It said, "You showed up for your boss when it cost you something to do so." Listen, that's the kind of person I should have been from the start. And sat very still. Emily stepped back. She gave him the room. After a moment, and said, without turning around, that last line, Emily said, "Did he write that himself, or did Holloway write it?" "I don't know," Emily said honestly. "It matters," Ryan said. She agreed. "But either way, it's said. And either way, you have it in writing." Ryan turned back to his computer. He read it again. His jaw was tight in the particular way of a young man who is managing an emotion he doesn't want to display at work. He said finally, "Okay, it's enough," he said. "It's actually enough." Emily put her hand briefly on his shoulder. And he was. 1 second. Then she went back to the truck she'd been working on, because the work didn't stop, and because the best thing she could do for Ryan right now was let him have that moment privately, without an audience, without anyone watching him decide what to do with a genuine apology from a man who'd threatened him in a parking lot. She rolled back under the truck she worked. Danny came to find her at 4:30. He knocked on the garage door frame, not the side door, the actual garage door, which was open to the afternoon, and Emily rolled out from under the truck and looked up at him from the floor. "And a head out," he said. She got up, wiped her hand. "Everything okay out there?" "Fine," he said, quiet. No one came back except him, and he left. He paused. "You handled that well." "He handled it well," Emily said. At the end, Danny considered that with the particular fairness of someone who doesn't give credit cheaply but gives it accurately. "Yeah," he said, "he did at the end." They stood together for a moment in the way of people who have known each other long enough that silence is comfortable between them. "I owe you," Emily said. "You don't," Danny said immediately. "Through this, I know, but Emily," his voice was firm but not unkind. "You spent 3 years in a world that was hard, and you did your time there honestly, and you left clean, and you built something real. The fact that we came when you called isn't a favor you owe back. It's just what this is." He looked at her steadily. "Was. You understand me?" She did. She didn't entirely agree, because she was not the kind of person who accepted without accounting. She understood what he was saying and what he meant by it, yeah, and she respected it. "How many people came?" she asked. 53, he said. "Same 53 I told you." "From how far?" He named states. "Montana, obviously. Idaho. Wyoming. One from Washington who'd been 3 hours out when he got Danny's call and had simply turned around and driven through the night." Emily absorbed that. Someone had turned their vehicle around at midnight and driven 3 hours in the dark because Danny Reeves had made a call about Emily Carter. "Who was it?" she said. "From Washington?" Danny almost smiled. Torres, Emily repeated. "I haven't spoken to Torres in 5 years. He said to tell you hi," Danny said, "and that you still owe him a rematch at cards." Something moved through Emily that she could only describe as warmth, the specific, deep warmth that comes not from being loved by people who have to love you, but from being cared about by people who chose to. People who had done the calculating on their own time and decided she was worth the trip. "Tell him the rematch stands," she said. Danny nodded. The garage one more time at the tools, the certifications, the workbench worn smooth by years of use. "Nice place," he said. "Solid." "It is," Emily said. "Your dad built good." "He built honest," she said. It out to be the same thing. Danny looked at her. That deep, quiet look. "Don't disappear for another 3 years," he said. "Oh," she said. He held out his hand. She shook it. He pulled her in briefly, The same as that morning, one moment, enough. And then he walked back to his people. She stood at the garage door and watched them go. All 53 of them, pulling out in the ordered, unhurried way they'd arrived. The sound building, and then fading as they reached the main highway and turned and became a diminishing rumble in the distance, smaller and smaller, gone. The road outside was empty, was just a lot again. Ryan came and stood beside her. Gone, he said. Yeah, she said. They both stood there for a moment looking at the ordinary, unchanged road. Emily, Ryan said. Yeah, tell me one thing. Just one thing about that life, who you were, what it was. I'm not asking for everything. Just one thing that's real. Emily thought about it for a long time. Then she said, the first time I ever made a decision that mattered, the first time someone in real trouble trusted me to do the right thing, and I did it, and it cost me something to do it, that was the first time I understood what I was capable of. Not power, not protection, just reliability. Being exactly who you said you were going to be. She paused. Everything else in that life came from that. And everything I've built here came from that too. And was quiet. That's more than one thing, he said finally. You asked for one real one. Emily said, that's it. Everything else is just detail. He nodded slowly and went back inside. Emily looked at the road for one more moment. Then she went back to work. The last 4 accounts called back over the next 2 days. Not simultaneously, not in a rush. They came back the way things come back when they're genuine, rather than forced one at a time, in their own time, with the slightly uncomfortable candor of people admitting that they had behaved badly under pressure and were now trying to do better. Sutter Ranch called on Thursday afternoon. The man Emily spoke to, the same man who had said carefully vague things about going in a different direction 11 days earlier, said simply, we got a call from the Whitmore boy. We want to come back if you'll have us. 11 years is 11 years, Emily said. I'll have you. He exhaled with the relief of someone who wasn't sure he deserved it, and was. I should have called you the moment I heard from them, he said. I should have told you what was happening. I took the easy road. You took the road that protected your business, Emily said. I understand that. It wasn't right. No, she agreed. It wasn't, but you're calling now. Your father never let us down once, the man said. Not in 18 years. I didn't have any business letting someone lean on me into doing that to you. Emily said, what was my father's name for you? A pause. Quietly, Big Hank. He told me about Big Hank, Emily said. He told me you were one of the straightest men in the county. The silence on the line was the specific silence of an older man who has just been reminded of who he was supposed to be. Coming back, Big Hank said, and his voice was different, now settled, certain, with the particular steadiness of a man who has found his footing again after losing it. I'll send the contract renewal tomorrow morning, Emily said. She hung up. She sat at her desk. She picked up her pen and she put a line through the last name on the cancellation list she'd started building 3 weeks ago. 11 names, 11 lines through them. The documentation folder sat on the corner of her desk, thick with everything she'd recorded, every call, every date, every word she'd written down in the careful way her father had taught, her and her own instincts had reinforced. She picked it up. She put it in the filing cabinet. She closed the drawer. She called Marcus. All 11, she said. Confirmed. Marcus let out a breath that contained 40 years of lawyering and a genuine human being's relief. None. File the dismissal, Emily said, Terry, without prejudice. And Marcus, I want a letter in his file. Not public, just on record. What happened when it happened, what was documented. Not punitive, just real. So there's a record of who did what. That's Emily. That's actually quite sophisticated. It means the next person he tries this with has a record to find if they look, she said. I'm not protecting him from his own history. I'm just not extending it beyond what it needs to be. Quiet for a moment. You know, he said, there are very few people I've known in 40 years of practice who understand the difference between justice and punishment as clearly as you do. My father used to say they're only the same thing when the person administering them has their ego out of it, Emily said. My father was a wise man. He was a stubborn man who happened to be right about most things. Emily said, which is its own kind of wisdom. She could hear Marcus smiling. I'll file the dismissal this afternoon. And Emily, if you ever need anything, you'll be my first call, she said. Second, he said immediately, I know where I rank. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her the best kind, thanked him and hung up. Logan called on Friday morning. Not Holloway. Logan himself, on the shop's direct line at 8:42, which meant he'd called early enough that he was probably sitting somewhere with coffee, having made the decision to call before he had time to talk himself out of it. Emily answered, Carter Towing, a brief pause. It's Logan Whitmore. I know, she said. I wanted to. He stopped, started again. I spoke to all 11 accounts. I went to the county clerk yesterday morning. Holloway tells me the legal filing is being dismissed. So it's done, he said. The business part is done, Emily said. Pause. Is there another part? She thought about how to answer that. And he was. She thought about the question she'd asked him in the parking lot. If I'd told you who I was from the beginning, would you have treated me differently? She thought about his answer, I don't know, and what it had meant that he gave the honest one instead of the easy one. Was. Logan, she said, there's a version of this where you go back to your life and you file this under situations I'd rather not repeat and you move on. That's available to you. She paused. And there's a version where you actually think about why it went this way, not to punish yourself, just to understand it, because the next time you walk into a situation and the person you're dealing with isn't what you expected, you'll have this one to reference. Silence. Which version do you think I'll choose, he asked. And the thing was, she didn't entirely know. She'd told Ryan these things never resolved cleanly in a single conversation. She'd meant it. Logan Whitmore was a complicated man who had done genuinely wrong things and had then, when pressed to the wall, found the capacity to do genuinely right ones. What that meant for who he was going to be going forward, that was his work, not hers. Think, Emily said carefully, that the fact you're making this call instead of having Holloway send a summary memo suggests something about which version you're leaning toward. Another silence. Longer this time. For what it's worth, Logan said, the call I made to your supplier, Jim Palante, he told me to go to hell when I first called him 3 weeks ago. He paused. Thanks was, when I called him back to correct things, he told me to go to hell again. And then he said that if I ever interfered with one of his accounts again, he'd make sure every business contact he had in the state knew about it personally. Emily said nothing. I called him back a third time, Logan said, to say I deserved that. Emily sat with that for a moment. Jim Palante, who had told a silver-tongued caller to go to hell and then called Emily to warn her. Jim Palante, who was 70 years old and had run his parts supply business for 23 years on the same principle her father had used to run the tow company, honesty as protection, character as currency. What did Jim say? Emily asked. He said, good, Logan said. Good. That sounds like Jim, Emily said. Logan almost laughed. It was a real sound, rough at the edges, nothing like the smooth and practiced version she'd heard from him before. Said, and to be honest with you, this one landed. He said, Emily Carter's been running that shop with more integrity than most people bring to their entire lives. Said, you'd have known if you'd been paying attention to the right things. The shop was very quiet. Jim has a gift for the specific truth, Emily said. Agreed. Miss Carter. He stopped. She could hear him working out how to say something he'd probably rewritten several times in his head on the way to saying it out loud. I've spent a lot of years in a world where the metric for how you treated someone is what they could do for you, not who they were, what they were worth to you, specifically in a specific moment. He paused. I didn't think of that as a problem because everyone around me operated the same way. You were the first person who made me see it from outside that system. Emily waited. I'm not saying I'm fixed, Logan said. I know that's not how this works, but I'm another stop. I'm thinking about it differently than I was a month ago. That's true. Whatever it's worth something, Emily said. I took something from you, he said. 3 weeks of damage to a business you worked to build. Some of those relationships might not be fully repaired even if the accounts came back. Some of them might not. Emily agreed. I'm aware I can't give that back. Oh, she said, you can't. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have arrived at the honest version of a conversation after spending too long at the surface of it. Then what do I do with that? Logan asked. Emily thought about it. She thought about what it actually meant to cause damage you couldn't fully undo, to have taken something from someone and have the restoration be real but incomplete. Because life wasn't a math problem where the right steps canceled out the wrong ones. She had known that before. She'd lived it before in the other life, in moments that were considerably higher stakes than this. She knew what it meant to sit with something you'd done wrong that couldn't be entirely unmade. Carry it, she said. Not as punishment, as information. The next time you're in a situation where you have more power than someone else, you remember what it felt like to do this, and you choose differently. She paused. That's it. That's actually it. There's no ceremony. There's no moment of absolution. You just remember and choose differently. Logan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, that sounds harder than a formal apology. Emily said, by a lot. A pause. I thought so. She almost liked him in that moment, not in the way of forgetting what he'd done or papering over it with relief that it had resolved, in the specific, complicated way that you can recognize the genuine parts of a person who has also shown you the worst parts of them. Both things were true. Both things could be true at once, and that was fine, because people were not simple math. Logan, she said. Yeah, your father was a great fighter because he could read a fight, because he could tell what was actually happening instead of what he wanted to be happening. She paused. That skill runs in your family. You just applied it late. Thank you, he said finally. It was simple. No elaboration. No performance. Take care of yourself, Emily said. She hung up. She sat at her desk for a moment, alone, in the shop her father had built from one truck and stubbornness and a belief that honest work was its own dignity. She looked at the wall, at the frame certifications, at the schedule board, full again, full in a way it had not been 3 weeks ago, full with the work of a business that had been tested and had not broken. She thought about every version of herself that had sat at this desk. The 28-year-old who had come back to Crestfall after 3 years that had marked her in ways she still sometimes found when she wasn't expecting to. The woman who had made a deliberate choice to be small, to be quiet, to let the noise of who she'd been settle down into something manageable. The shop owner who had built relationships over years, Jim Palante, Marcus Webbs, Big Hank at Sutter Ranch, Sandra Cho, who whispered courage into a phone at personal risk. The employer who had watched Ryan Mitchell grow from a nervous 23-year-old into the person who had stood steady through 3 weeks of something that would have rattled most people twice his age. And the woman who had opened the locked room, who had taken the vest off the hook, who had made one phone call and waited to see 53 people drive through the morning because she had earned their trust over years through specific acts in specific moments, by being exactly who she said she was going to be every time it mattered. All of those women were the same woman. None of them canceled the others out. And knocked on the office door. He had 2 cups of coffee. He set one on her desk without being asked. End of day, he said. All 11 accounts officially back on the books. Confirmation emails in the folder. Emily looked at the confirmation folder he set on the desk. 11 accounts, 11 relationships that had been quietly pressured out of existence by a man who thought small people could be erased without consequence. And here they were, back on the books, restored not identically to what they had been, because you couldn't unsay the things that had been said, real, and moving forward. Good work today, she said. Ryan sat down in the chair across from her desk, the chair where he'd sat 3 weeks ago, to tell her about the man in the parking lot. The one with the too specific warning and the unhurried manner of someone delivering a message they'd delivered before. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at her. I say something? He asked. You've never asked before, she said. This is different, he said. He paused, organizing it. I took this job when I answered the listing for Carter Towing 18 months ago. I was just looking for work. I needed hours, and I needed a boss who wasn't going to make me feel like I was lucky to be there. He paused. I didn't know I was going to get what I got. Which was what? Emily said. Someone who showed up, Ryan said. Every single day. The same way. No performance. No, there was never a version of you at this shop that wasn't exactly who you were. Even when I found out there were more versions than I knew, they were all the same person. He looked at her. I didn't know that was possible. I thought people were different depending on who was watching. He looked at him. People are, she said. That's actually the ordinary thing. Being the same regardless of who's watching, that's the harder thing. That's the thing you have to choose. Consciously, every day, until it stops feeling like a choice and starts just being who you are. And was quiet. How do you start? He asked. You start, she said, by deciding that the person who sees you at your worst, the customer, who's angry at 2 a.m. on a cold highway, and who thinks they're more important than your price list, who tests you specifically to see if you'll fold, you decide that person deserves the same version of you as everyone else. Not because they've earned it, because you have. Ryan absorbed that slowly. That's what you were doing, he said, with Logan. Night. From the first night. From the first night, Emily confirmed. He nodded. He drank his coffee. He looked at the desk between them at the documentation folder, the confirmation folder, the ordinary debris of a working day in a shop that had just survived something that would have finished most small businesses in a month. Emily, he said, what's the vest mean? She looked at him. It was the question she'd known was coming. The only real question, the one underneath all the others. Not who are the people, not how did they get here, not what's the history. What's the vest mean? It means, she said slowly, that at a specific point in my life, I was in a position where I had to choose between doing the easy thing and doing the right thing. Was people over years in situations where the cost of the right thing was real. And I chose the right thing enough times, consistently enough, that the people around me trusted me with things that mattered to them. She paused. That's what the vest means. The rest of the organization, the history, the reputation, all of that is just the context. The meaning is simpler. Ryan looked at her, and coming back here, he said, the tow truck, the shop, that was also choosing the right thing. That was choosing the right thing for me, she said, which isn't always the same as the right thing for someone else. I needed to build something that was mine on my terms with my name on it, not inheriting a reputation, not riding something someone else built. She looked around the office. This is mine. And when Logan came along and tried to take it, he wasn't going to take it, Emily said firmly and without drama. He was never going to take it. He could damage it. He could complicate it. He could make me work harder than I should have had to. But taking it would have required me to let him, and I wasn't going to do that. Sat quietly for a moment. Then I want to build something, he said. Someday. Like this. Emily looked at him. She thought about herself at 23, not this version. The other one. The one who was doing things that were difficult and important, but that were never entirely hers. She thought about the years it had taken her to understand the difference between building for yourself and building alongside someone else's structure. She thought about how young Ryan was and how much time he had and how the fact that he could name what he wanted, I want to build something, was itself the beginning. Then build it, she said. Start now. Not the building, the character, the consistency, the record. She held his gaze. Because when the moment comes where someone tries to take it from you, the only thing that's going to hold is who you've been every day before that moment. Ryan nodded. He stood up. He collected his coffee cup. He stood at the door for a moment and looked back at her with the expression of a young man who has learned things today that he will spend years understanding fully. Oh, he said. Same time tomorrow, Emily said. He left. She sat alone. The shop settled around her with the sounds of a building at the end of a working day, the small ticks and silences and particular quiet that a place takes on when the work is done and the people have gone home, and what remains is just the thing, self, solid and real, without needing anyone to look at it to be what it was. Emily Carter sat at her desk. She thought about her father, who had taught her that honest work was its own dignity and that the only thing worth having was respect that didn't need explaining. She thought about Danny Reeves, who had told her she was never alone and meant it in a way that 53 motorcycles on a Thursday morning had made concrete and undeniable. She thought about Marcus Webb, who had spent 3 weeks building a case with the focused precision of a man who understood that documentation was a form of justice and that justice was worth doing carefully. She thought about Sandra Cho whispering into a phone, deciding that decency mattered more than safety. She thought about Jim Palante, telling a silver-tongued caller to go to hell twice and accepting an apology from him on the third call with a single word that said everything. She thought about Big, who had taken the easy road and then called back because he remembered whose daughter she was and who he was supposed to be. She thought about Ryan Mitchell, 23 years old, who had walked into a job he needed and found something he hadn't expected and had stayed steady through something that would have broken older, more practiced people. And she thought about Logan Whitmore, who had laughed on a dark highway at a woman in oil-stained jeans, who had spent 3 weeks systematically trying to erase her from the economic landscape of a small Montana town, who had stood in her parking lot on a Thursday morning and finally seen her, who had called Jim Palante a third time to say he deserved what Jim said to him, who had asked, honestly, I don't know, when the honest answer was the harder one. She did not forgive him in the simple way of pretending it hadn't happened. She was not built for that kind of forgiveness, and she didn't believe it was the honest kind anyway. She held him in the complicated way of someone who had seen the worst and the better of a person and was willing to let both things be true without resolving them into something simpler than they were. That was all she owed him. That was all she owed herself. She reached into her desk drawer. She took out the key. She looked at it. Then she walked to the storage room and hung it back on the hook inside the door and left the key there, not in her pocket, not in the desk, but in the room itself. She was available, reachable, no longer hidden, because she was done hiding it, because every part of her life had earned its place in the same story, and none of it needed to be locked away anymore. She closed the storage room door quietly. She turned off the office light. She walked through the garage, which smelled of oil and steel and honest work, and she hit the last light switch, and she locked the front door behind her, and she stood in the lot for one moment, looking at the sign Carter Towing, father's name, her name, the same name, and then she got in her truck and drove home. Behind her, the shop stood exactly as it had always stood, honest, hers, not because anyone had given it to her, not because she had inherited someone else's power or reputation or protection, but because she had built it every relationship, every receipt, every logged phone call, every honest price for every customer who called at 2 in the morning on a cold Montana highway. She had built it with her own hands and her own character and the accumulated weight of every right choice she had made when the wrong one was easier. Logan Whitmore had thought a quiet person was a weak person. He had spent 3 weeks trying to erase someone who had spent 15 years becoming unarrestable. And the tow truck driver in the oil-stained jeans had stood completely still while the truth caught up with his assumption. She had not needed to announce who she was. She had simply needed to be it. And she had been it every single day on cold highways, at 2 in the morning, with a flashlight in her teeth and a fair price on her clipboard and the absolute, unmovable certainty of a person who knows exactly what they are and has never once needed anyone else's permission to be it. That was Emily Carter. That was who she had always been. And the road ahead of her was long, and the work was real, and the shop would open tomorrow at 8 o'clock, exactly. And she would be there. She was always there.